The silence before the words. The night was calm, yet inside the crowded hall, the air was heavy with expectation. The lights were soft, shining gently on the stage where Keanu sat beside Sandra. People were clapping and cheering, but both of them seemed lost in a world of their own. It was not the applause or the flashing cameras that held Keanu's attention. It was the quiet presence of Sandra beside him, the way her hands rested calmly, and the way her eyes carried something unspoken. From the outside, it looked like just another evening, another gathering where stars appeared to share moments with the world. But inside, Keanu felt a storm he could not name. He had always known Sandra as someone kind, humble, and strong. But tonight there was something different in her. It was as if she carried a secret in her heart, waiting for the right moment to be released. Keanu leaned slightly closer, trying to hear her words as the audience grew louder. He had never been the type to rush things. His nature was calm, thoughtful, and careful. He believed in respecting silence, respecting the hidden feelings people carried. Yet, a part of him sensed that something important was about to unfold. Sandra turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. In that single glance, he saw years of friendship, laughter, quiet support, and countless unspoken emotions. She smiled gently, almost nervously, and for the first time that night, Keanu felt his own heart skip a beat. He did not know why, but he knew this moment was unlike any other they had shared before. As the crowd around them faded into background noise, Sandra leaned closer. Her voice was softer than a whisper, yet it struck Keanu like thunder. "I love you," she said, her lips barely moving, her eyes fixed on his with a mix of fear and courage. Keanu froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. The cheers of the crowd, the flashing lights, the hum of cameras, all of it disappeared. He could only hear the sound of his own heartbeat, heavy and unsteady. Those 3 words, so simple and so powerful, carried the weight of years. He had always admired Sandra's kindness, her ability to see beauty in the simplest things, her strength when life tested her, and her gentle humor that could light up even his darkest days. But he had never allowed himself to think of her words in that way. He had never imagined that behind her laughter and quiet gestures, she had been holding on to feelings so deep. Conflict rose inside him. Part of him wanted to respond instantly, to hold her hand, to tell her she was not alone in her feelings. But another part of him hesitated. He was a man who had carried losses, who had walked through shadows, who knew the weight of broken promises. He feared hurting her, feared giving her something he might not be able to protect forever. The silence stretched between them. Sandra's eyes searched his, looking for an answer, a sign, anything that could tell her she had not made a mistake. She had risked her heart, and now it rested in his hands. Keanu's lips parted, but no words came. His throat tightened. His breath grew heavy. He wanted to speak, but the depth of the moment stole his voice. It was not rejection. It was not acceptance. It was the battle of a heart that had been too careful for too long. The world around them suddenly grew loud again, but inside Keanu everything was quiet, too quiet. He could not move, could not escape the truth that her words had awakened something inside him, something he thought had been gone for years. And in that silence, 1,000 questions filled his mind. Why now? Why here? What if he failed her? What if he could not give her the love she deserved? But among all those questions, there was also a soft glow of hope, because deep inside, even he could not deny the truth, that her whisper had touched the deepest part of his soul. And as the evening went on, both of them sat side by side, the world around them unaware of the storm that had just begun inside their hearts. The weight of silence, the car ride after the event was strangely quiet. The driver focused on the road, while the city lights passed by like fleeting stars. Keanu sat in the back seat, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the glass window. Beside him, Sandra leaned slightly forward, her fingers touching. The edge of her dress, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. Neither of them spoke. The memory of her whisper still hung between them, heavy and unshakable. Sandra had waited years to say those words, and now that they were out, she felt both lighter and more afraid. She wondered if she had ruined everything, if she had crossed a line that could not be crossed back. Keanu, on the other hand, felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Part of him wanted to leap, to embrace what Sandra had offered, to trust the truth of his heart. But another part held him back, chained by memories of loss and pain, of people he had loved and then lost. He had always been careful with love, because he knew how fragile it was. The silence was not empty. It was full of questions, fears, and emotions too large to put into words. Keanu turned his head slowly, watching Sandra's face in the faint glow of passing streetlights. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed her. There was worry, hope, and a quiet strength in them. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. Her voice was steady, but soft. "You don't have to say anything tonight," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know. That's all." Keanu's chest tightened at her words. The kindness in her voice struck him deeply. She was not asking for a promise, not demanding an answer. She was giving him time, respecting his silence. That humility, that patience, only made her words echo louder in his heart. The driver pulled, up outside Sandra's house. She looked at Keanu one last time before opening the door. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes held the weight of everything she could not say again. "Good night," she said softly, stepping out into the quiet street. Keanu sat in the car long after she had gone inside. The driver waited, silent and respectful. Keanu's thoughts spun in circles. He remembered moments with Sandra that now seemed brighter, more meaningful. The way she laughed when he made a quiet joke. The way she always listened when he spoke about something close to his heart. The way she stood by him when others faded away. As the car pulled away, Keanu leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes. Her words repeated in his head again and again. "I love you." He realized then that he could not simply forget them. They had carved a place inside him that would not fade. But love was not simple for him. It was not just about feelings. It was about responsibility, about protecting the other person, about standing firm when life became cruel. And Keanu knew life could be very cruel. The night stretched on, and Keanu found himself unable to sleep. He walked through his quiet home, the silence pressing down on him. Every room carried memories of loneliness, of nights where he sat alone with his thoughts, of mornings where he forced himself to keep moving even when his heart felt heavy. Yet tonight was different. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt the spark of something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. Keanu sat on the edge of his bed, his hands clasped tightly. He thought of Sandra's courage, of the way she whispered her truth, even though she feared his silence. He admired her strength, her honesty, and her heart. Deep down, he knew that silence would not be enough. He could not run from what she had given him. Sooner or later, he would have to face his own feelings, his own truth. And as the first light of dawn touched the sky, Keanu whispered to himself words he had not said in years. What if I let myself love again? Echoes of the past the next day began like any other for Keanu, but inside he felt a quiet storm. The world outside moved normally. Cars rushed through the streets. People hurried to work. The sun rose with its usual glow. But for him, nothing felt ordinary. Every sound, every step seemed to remind him of the whisper that still echoed in his mind. "I love you." He could hear Sandra's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside him. He tried to distract himself, tried to bury the thought beneath his morning coffee and the pages of a script waiting on his desk. But no matter what he did, her words stayed with him, soft yet powerful. He walked into his living room and paused, by a framed picture. It was from years ago, a moment captured on set. He and Sandra were standing side by side, both smiling, both unaware of how important their connection would become. Keanu picked up the frame and stared at it. Her smile in that photo carried the same warmth she had shown him countless times in real life. Only now, it felt different. Now he knew the truth behind it. Memories flooded him. Long nights of filming together, when exhaustion weighed on both of them, but her laughter kept him going. Quiet dinners after long days, when they spoke not about fame or work, but about life, family, and dreams, and moments of silence, too, when they did not need words to feel close. But along with those memories came others, darker ones. He remembered times when he had loved and lost, when promises had been broken by life itself. He remembered how grief had shaped him, how pain had taught him to be careful, to never rush, to never open his heart too easily. That was the conflict burning inside him now. Sandra's words had lit a fire, but his past tried to pour water on it. Could he risk his heart again? Could he let her in, knowing how fragile everything was? Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra. Simple, kind, and thoughtful, just like her. I hope you're okay. I know last night was heavy. I didn't mean to put pressure on you. I just wanted to be honest. Keanu read the message 3 times, his hands tightening around the phone. She was giving him space, just as she promised. She was not demanding, not questioning. She was being patient, even when her own heart must have been trembling. He typed a reply, then deleted it. He tried again, but nothing felt right. In the end, he simply wrote, "Thank you. I'm thinking about it." He knew it was not much, but it was honest. It was the best he could give in that moment. That evening, Keanu went for a walk. The streets were quiet, the air cool. He liked walking when his mind was heavy. It gave him space to breathe, to think, to listen to his own heart. As he walked, past glowing street lamps and distant sounds of the city, he found himself imagining a life with Sandra, a life where he allowed himself to love again. The thought scared him, but it also warmed him. Suddenly, he felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He realized this was not just about Sandra's words. It was about him, too. It was about whether he would let his past control his future, or whether he would find the courage to take a step forward. When he returned home, he sat quietly in his chair, staring at the darkness outside his window. The silence was deep, but inside his chest, something was shifting. For the first time in years, he did not feel only the weight of the past. He also felt the possibility of something new, something fragile, yet powerful. And as the night deepened, he whispered to himself a thought that scared him as much as it comforted him. Maybe I already love her too. The unspoken battle. Following days felt longer than usual. Keanu went through his routines, meetings, reading scripts, answering calls, but beneath every action a quiet storm remained. He carried Sandra's words like a hidden flame, small yet unshakable, burning quietly in the background of his every thought. Sandra, too, felt the silence stretch. She did not press him for answers. She knew Keanu well enough to understand his careful heart. But patience was not easy. Every morning she woke up with a mix of hope and fear, wondering if she had risked too much, if her whisper had changed something that could never return to what it was before. One evening, fate placed them together again. They had both been invited to a small charity event, something quiet, not filled with flashing cameras and noise. The moment they saw each other, the room seemed to fade. Sandra smiled politely, but her eyes searched his face for a sign. Keanu gave a small nod, gentle yet heavy with meaning. Throughout the evening, they found themselves moving closer, drawn not by choice but by something stronger. Finally, away from the crowd, they stood side by side near a balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, the night sky painted with stars, and for a moment it felt like the world had slowed just for them. Sandra broke the silence first. "You don't have to be afraid of me," she said softly. Her voice carried no demand, only understanding. "I don't expect you to be anyone else. I just wanted you to know how I feel. That's all." Keanu turned his head toward her. Her words were simple, but they cut through his fears like light breaking through shadows. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words he wanted to say trembled on his lips, but his heart hesitated. Inside, a battle raged. He wanted to tell her everything, that her kindness had been a lifeline, that her presence had made his darkest days brighter, that her whisper had touched a part of him he thought was gone. But then came the fear. What if he failed her? What if he could not protect her heart? What if love brought only pain again? Sandra stepped a little closer, her eyes gentle yet firm. "Keanu," she whispered, "life is never safe. We both know that, but sometimes it's worth the risk." Her words struck him deeply. He stared at her, and in her eyes he saw not just love but resilience, strength, and the quiet courage that had always been part of who she was. Keanu took a deep breath. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, his voice low. "I don't know how to promise something when I'm afraid I might break it." Sandra shook her head gently. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for honesty. Whatever your heart says, even if it's silence, I can take it. But don't hide from me. Not you." For a moment, the world felt too still. Keanu's chest tightened, his throat heavy. His heart was pulling him forward, but his fears chained him back. He looked away at the city lights, searching for courage in the distance. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know if I deserve it." Sandra reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. "Love is not about deserving," she said softly. "It's about giving, and you've been giving in ways you don't even see." Her touch was gentle, yet it carried warmth that spread through him. For the first time in years, Keanu felt his fears tremble against the strength of someone else's faith in him. He did not speak again that night. But as they stood together under the stars, something shifted quietly. The wall inside him, built over years of silence and grief, had begun to crack. The breaking point. The night after the charity event, Keanu lay awake in his bed. The room was dark, but his mind was alive with memories. Every word Sandra had spoken replayed in his thoughts. Love is not about deserving, it's about giving. Her voice carried both gentleness and strength, and it stayed with him like a steady echo. He turned on his side, staring at the quiet outline of the window. He realized how long he had lived inside walls of silence, protecting himself from pain, but also shutting out warmth. Sandra's courage had unsettled those walls. She had given him something he was not ready for, yet something he deeply needed: hope. For days, Keanu avoided calls and gatherings. He needed space to think, to breathe. But Sandra was never far from his mind. Her face, her eyes, her patience, every part of her followed him into his silence. Finally, after nearly a week, Keanu made a decision. He picked up his phone and called Sandra. When she answered, her voice was calm, though he could sense the quick beat of her heart behind it. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," she replied, almost in a whisper. There was silence between them, the kind that carried weight, not emptiness. Keanu took a deep breath. "I want to see you. Can we meet?" They met that evening at a small cafe tucked away from the noise of the city. It was quiet, warm, with soft lights that painted the room in gentle colors. Sandra arrived first, sitting near the corner, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. When Keanu walked in, her heart tightened. He looked calm on the outside, but his eyes carried something restless, something searching. He sat across from her, his hands resting on the table. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No words, no noise, just two hearts caught between silence and truth. Finally, Keanu spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about love, about risks." His voice was low, steady, but every word seemed to carry the weight of years. "I don't know if I can promise perfection. I don't know if I can promise forever. But what I do know is that your words, they didn't scare me. They woke me up." Sandra's eyes softened, but she stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I've been afraid," Keanu admitted, his gaze lowering for a moment. "Afraid of losing, afraid of hurting, afraid of opening my heart again. But when you said you love me, something inside me changed. It felt terrifying, but it also felt right." Sandra's fingers tightened gently around her cup. She leaned forward, her voice tender. "So what does your heart say now?" Keanu looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he let his guard fall. "My heart says I love you too. I've just been too scared to see it." The words hung in the air, soft but powerful. Sandra's eyes filled with quiet tears, not of sadness, but of relief. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. Keanu took it, his grip gentle yet firm. The cafe was silent around them, but in that moment, it felt like the loudest truth either of them had ever spoken. Yet even in this warmth, Keanu felt a shadow linger. He knew love was not only about sweet words, it was about trials, about storms that could shake the strongest hearts. And deep inside, he wondered if the world would test them, if life would allow this fragile beginning to grow. But for now, he held her hand and let himself believe. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to step out of silence and into the light of something new. The storm arrives, the days that followed their confession felt lighter. For the first time in years, Keanu allowed himself to smile without hesitation. He and Sandra shared small moments that felt larger than life, late-night calls, quiet walks, and laughter that carried more meaning than words could explain. But happiness is never safe from life's storms. It always arrives when the heart begins to feel secure, testing the strength of the bond that has just begun to grow. One evening, while Keanu was on his way home, a group of reporters surrounded him. Their cameras flashed, their voices sharp. Questions flew in every direction. Some were harmless, about movies and work, but then came the ones that pierced. "Are you and Sandra together? Is it true she confessed her love in public?" Keanu froze for a moment, caught in the sudden fire of attention. His private world had always been his shield, and now that shield was breaking. He kept his head down, his silence steady, but the questions did not stop. When the news reached Sandra, she felt her heart drop. She had always been ready for the world's eyes, but this was different. This was not about her work, not about fame. It was about her heart, her truth, something too fragile to be thrown into public fire. That night, they met in Keanu's home. The lights were dim, the air heavy. Sandra's face carried both fear and strength. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with thought. "I know. I didn't say anything, but they'll keep pushing." Sandra sank onto the couch, her hands gripping together. "I don't want what we have to turn into a story for others. I don't want our truth to be twisted into something it isn't." Keanu sat beside her, his silence steady but full. He had lived his life away from the noise, away from the spotlight of personal questions. Now, for the first time, that light was breaking into something he wanted to protect. He reached for her hand. We don't owe anyone our truth. We only owe it to each other. Her eyes met his, tears shining in the low light. But what if the world makes it harder? What if they don't let us breathe? Keanu's chest tightened. He had no easy answer. Life had always been this way, testing, pushing, demanding. But he also knew one thing. Then we stand together. Even if the world doesn't understand, we will. Sandra leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. The silence was heavy but comforting. For a moment, they simply breathed. Together, hearts steady despite the storm outside. Yet deep inside, Keanu knew this was only the beginning of their test. Love was fragile, and the world was ruthless. The whispers, the questions, the eyes of millions, they would not fade. And he wondered if their hearts would be strong enough to carry the weight. Still, as he held her close, he felt something he had not felt in years: courage. Not because he was fearless, but because he had finally found someone worth facing the fear for. Love that survives. The storm did not pass quickly. In the weeks that followed, the whispers grew louder. Magazines wrote stories filled with guesses, fans debated endlessly, and reporters searched for answers that Keanu and Sandra were not ready to give. At first, the pressure weighed heavily on Sandra. She was strong, but every time she saw her, feelings reduced to headlines. Her heart ached. What she had whispered to Keanu had been pure and personal, a moment of courage between two hearts. Now it was something the world tried to own. Keanu noticed the heaviness in her eyes. One evening, he found her sitting quietly in his living room, her gaze distant. He sat beside her, his hand gently resting on hers. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Sandra shook her head, tears forming. "I wanted this to be ours. I didn't want the world to take it from us. I'm scared, Keanu. Not of you, not of us, but of losing the peace we found." Keanu looked at her for a long moment. His silence was not distance. It was thought. It was care. Finally, he spoke. "I can't promise the world will be quiet, but I can promise I won't let go of you, no matter how loud they get." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of his soul. Sandra leaned into him, her tears falling softly. In that moment, she knew that even if the world tried to break them, his quiet strength would stand beside her. Days passed, and slowly the noise began to fade. The world moved on, chasing new stories, new distractions. But in the quiet corners of their lives, Keanu and Sandra grew closer. They spent evenings walking under the stars, mornings sharing coffee, and afternoons filled with gentle laughter. The bond that began with a whisper had survived its first test. It had faced the storm of eyes and questions, and it had not broken. Instead, it had grown deeper. One night, they returned to the same balcony where Sandra had first told him the truth. The city lights glowed below, the stars above scattered like diamonds. Keanu turned to her, his expression calm but full of something she had long waited to see: certainty. He took her hand, holding it with both of his. His voice was steady, though filled with emotion. "That night, when you whispered to me, I froze because I was afraid. But now, I know the truth. I love you, Sandra. Not in silence, not in fear, but in the light of everything we are." Sandra's heart trembled as tears filled her eyes. This time, they were not tears of worry, but of joy. She squeezed his hand, tightly, whispering back, "And I love you. Always." They stood together in the quiet night, the world around them fading into nothing. For them, there was no crowd, no spotlight, no storm. Only two hearts that had found the courage to stand. Side by side, Keanu had carried years of silence, of grief, of fear. Sandra had carried love, patience, and unshakable faith. Together, they had turned whispers into promises and fear into strength. As the stars watched silently above, Keanu and Sandra knew that love would not remove life's storms, but it would give them the strength to face those storms together. And that was enough.